Alright, so today we are going to start Syed Ahmed Barelvi. This is the next religious reformer in chapter 1, History 2059 over 1 IGCSE O level. I have divided this lecture into four headings. Each heading would cover the exam's question largely. For example, in the introduction and biographical section, I would try to cover the 4 mark question. For example, what was the jihad movement, who was Syed Ahmed Barelvi. So these are the 4 mark questions, so I would try to cover these questions under this heading. The next is beliefs. Under this heading of belief, I would try to cover largely 7 mark question. For example, the question, why did Syed Ahmed Barelvi start jihad movement against Sikhs in the early 19th century? Or we have a 7 mark question as to why did Syed Ahmed Barelvi wish to revive Islam in India? So these are the questions that I would largely try to cover in the heading that is beliefs. The next is work and contribution. This heading is very important, and this would largely cover 14 mark question. For example, the exam question is, was the work of Syed Ahmed Barelvi the most important factor in the revival of Islam in the subcontinent? Give reasons for your answer. So, or we have another question like, to what extent Syed Ahmed Barelvi contributed to the spread of Islam in India? So these were the question, the 14 mark question that would largely be covered in the heading contributions. Then next is the final one is influence. Under this heading, I will try to cover the 7 mark question related to the influence of the contributions made by Syed Ahmed Barelvi. For example, we have the question, why did Syed Ahmed Barelvi have much influence on the revival of Islam in India? So these types of questions will be covered in the heading, the influence. Now I would start with the introduction, the first heading. As you can see, Syed Ahmed Barelvi was born in the year 1786. He was born in Lucknow. He was born basically in a town that is called Raebareli. It is a town near Lucknow, and his father died when he was a very young, and he acquired his early education at home. In the year 1806, he came to Delhi, and he enrolled in Madrasa Rahimia, and he became the disciple, the student, religious disciple or a student of Shah Abdul Aziz, who was the son of Shah Waliullah. And he continued his education until 1809. During his stay, he acquired religious education, and then he came back to his hometown, and in the year 1810 he joined the army of the Nawab of Tonk, Amir Khan. He was a Pathan overlord, and it is according to some historians, it was during his stay in the army of the Nawab of Tonk, Amir Khan, that Syed Ahmed Barelvi, his ideas were developed, and his ideas refined. His ideas developed in such a way that he started believing that in order to restore the power of the Muslim power in India, he had to take military action, jihad. So he wanted to restore the Muslim power in India through armed struggle. Now, in the year during his stay in the army of Nawab of Tonk, he learned the military skills. He learned how to use the modern weaponry, for example, the European weaponry. In the year 1817, he left the army of the Nawab of Tonk. Why? because Nawab of Tonk basically made an alliance with the British, and Syed Ahmed Barelvi was not happy with Nawab of Tonk making an alliance with the British, so he left his army and he then returned to his hometown, and in the year 1818 he returned to Delhi. And in those days Delhi, the ulama of Delhi, they were not basically they had not declared India as Darul Harb. Darul Harb means the house of war. If the Muslim territory comes under a non-Muslim rule, that territory is declared as house of war or war zone, and that territory is called Darul Harb. Now, the ulama in Delhi, for example, the ulama Shah Abdul Aziz, Shah Abdul Qadir, these were the ulama that belonged to the Madrasa Rahimia. They were not basically, they had not declared India, the whole of India, as Darul Harb. Now, if we look at the conditions of India in those days, there were three forces. On the one hand, the Mughals, the Mughal emperor. Secondly, the EIC, the English East India Company, and the third is the Sikh Kingdom in Punjab, the Sikh Kingdom. So India was basically being ruled by these three forces basically. Now, East India Company had expanded by the early 19th century. East India Company started consolidating its rule. It had made a territorial expansion. Although it acquired, it became like a master of India. Yet the Mughal emperor was still the ruler. Although he was the nominal ruler, he was perhaps at this stage, we may say, he was the ruler of India in name, because the influence of the East India Company was growing. The ulama basically, they did not declare the war zone or Darul Harb, the territory that was under the Mughal or the East India Company, the rule of Mughals, and under the rule of East India Company. But it was clear that the territory that came under the Sikh rule, that territory was basically Darul Harb. The Punjab, the parts of the Punjab, NWFP, and some parts of Afghanistan, these were the areas that were under the Sikh kingdom, that was being ruled by Ranjit Singh. And the Sikh did not obey the Mughal rule. They did not accept the Mughal rule. Now, Syed Ahmed Barelvi, he believed, now we are going to one by one discuss his belief. He believed that India had come under the non-Muslim rule and India was Darul Harb. Darul Harb means, as I told you before, a house of war. When a territory is declared Darul Harb, it means the Muslims would do two things. Number one, they would either wage jihad against the non-Muslim ruler, or they would leave that territory. No, Syed Ahmed Barelvi believed that India had come under the non-Muslim rule, so it was their religious duty to expel the non-Muslim rulers from India through armed struggle, through jihad. Secondly, he wanted to reform the customs of Indian Muslim. He wanted to purify the Muslim custom, from the non-Muslim traditions and the influence of the non-Muslim custom, because he believed that the territory that had come under the non-Muslim rule, there the Muslim had started adopting the traditions and custom that were not Islamic. So he wanted to reform those customs. For example, he wanted to promote widow remarriage, because he believed that according to the Sharia laws, widow remarriage should be promoted. Then he believed that and wanted that Indian Muslims should basically avoid lavish spending on ceremonies such as marriage ceremonies and other social activities. So he wanted the Indian Muslim to avoid all these lavish spending on these activities, social activities. So fourthly, he wanted that Indian Muslims should wage armed struggle against the non-Muslims who had established their rule in India, in order to re-establish an Islamic state in India. This was very important. So number fifth, he believed that Indian Muslims should wage jihad particularly against the Sikh kingdom, that where the Muslims were not enjoying religious freedom. Now basically when he returned to Delhi in the year 1818, he basically met Shah Ismail, who was the grandson of Shah Waliullah, and he met Abdul Hai, who was the son-in-law of Shah Abdul Aziz, and they basically took an oath of allegiance to Syed Ahmed Barelvi, and they started supporting him and basically joined his group. In the year 1818 and 19, Syed Ahmed Barelvi started mobilizing the people. He started visiting countryside, various places of India. For example, he visited Deoband, Saharanpur, Kandla, and so many other places, in order to enlist the people for raising an army to wage jihad. Now he was during his tour, he was basically trying to convince the people, trying to teach his beliefs, and he was trying to raise funds so that he could raise an army in order to wage jihad. In the year 1821, he decided that before making jihad, he should perform Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca, and he decided to undertake his journey to Mecca in order to perform Hajj. But his journey to Mecca, to Arabia, was a unique one in the sense that normally in those days it would take like 3 weeks for one to reach Mecca from India, but he took about 3 months to get to Mecca from India, because on his way to Hajj he basically he was visiting various places in order to mobilize people, in order to enlist the people to join. He wanted to teach them about his beliefs on jihad. He wanted to basically raise funds. So that was the reason that it took him longer than usual to get to Mecca. And it is said, this is very important point, one of the most important points that I can share that in Arabia, some historians has written that he at the place of Hudaybiyah, he made an oath to wage jihad in India, and after performing Hajj, he returned to India in the year 1823, and between 1823 and 26, he made preparation to wage jihad, and he was before going to Hajj, he started touring throughout all India. He basically went to Lucknow, his hometown, near Raebareli, and he started making tours around all those areas in order to mobilize the people, in order to basically raise funds to preach and teach the people, so that he could raise a sizable army in order to wage jihad. Before deciding to wage jihad, he decided that he should start jihad from northwest frontier of India. Why? Because India, northwest frontier was a Muslim populated area. Secondly, he knew that north, the Pathan, the local tribal people, they were more like war-minded people, and he would be able to win their support in order to wage jihad. Now, in January 1826, he undertook his journey. He started his journey. It was a long journey from he took basically 3,000 miles journey from North India to northwest frontier of India at that time. So he started his journey, and he reached, after reaching Rajasthan, he entered Sindh, and then he undertook his journey further. He reached Balochistan, and then he entered Afghanistan, and then from thence onward he started his journey further, and he reached northwest frontier of India near Peshawar, and he established his headquarters there in order to make jihad. Now he basically by November 1826, he was able to, when he started his journey, he had about between less than 10,000 people, but when he within a time of like 1 year, he was able to win the support of the local tribal leaders and the local population. And he basically he in the year 1826 he sent an ultimatum to Ranjit Singh, who was the ruler of the Sikh kingdom. He sent an ultimatum to him that he should allow the Indian Muslims full religious freedoms. It is told that the Muslims under the Sikh regime, Sikh rule, were not enjoying religious freedom. For example, in certain cases their azan was banned under the Sikh rule. The Badshahi mosque was converted into stable. So things like that. So he basically sent an ultimatum to Ranjit Singh that he should stop, he should allow the Indian Muslim to full religious freedom. But Ranjit Singh dismissed his ultimatum, and as a result of which he took the action. What happened? He made war at a place that is called Akhora Khatag, in which he defeated the Sikh. The army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi defeated the Sikh. Then shortly afterward he made another war, and that was in the place that is called Hazro, in which the Sikhs also suffered defeat by the army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi. Now After winning 2 wars in 1826, the size of the army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi increased to 80,000 people, 80,000 soldiers, and apart from that, he established an Islamic emirate, an Islamic state in northwest frontier of India, and he was able, the local people started supporting him. But what he did, he established an Islamic state, and he became the Amir al-Mu'mineen of the Islamic state that he established. When he established an emirate, an Islamic state, he started introducing Sharia laws. For example, he promoted widow remarriages. Local tribal population did not like the widow remarriages, for example. They did not like other reforms that Syed Ahmed Barelvi was trying to apply in those areas. So what happened? And second, then above all, now we are going to basically discuss the reason for the failure of jihad movement. Basically then what happened, that the Sikhs also made a propaganda that Syed Ahmed Barelvi was introducing reforms under the teaching of Shah Waliullah, and the local people, they also, under this propaganda, there was also rumors were made that Syed Ahmed Barelvi was promoting Wahhabi. He represented Wahhabi school of thought. So that was another reason why Syed Ahmed Barelvi and his army started losing support from the local people, local tribal population. Now basically what happened, that he started facing difficulties that were he was in trouble. But why? Because the local population did not largely accept the reforms that he was trying to introduce. So there were one of the commanders in his army, Yar Muhammad Khan Durrani, he betrayed Syed Ahmed Barelvi. Although he joined the army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi, he basically was bribed by the Sikhs, and he betrayed, and he secretly disclosed the information about the activity, about the movement of Syed Ahmed Barelvi to the Sikhs, to the Sikh army. And what happened, that in the year 1831 in Balakot, the army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi, they basically was attacked by the Sikhs, by an army of Sikh, and as a result, it was a sudden attack, because the local population, Yar Muhammad and his supporters, they basically leaked the information about the activities of the army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi to the Sikh, and the Sikhs suddenly attacked, and they killed Syed Ahmed Barelvi, Shah Ismail, and as a result of which it is stated that about 600 people from the army of Syed Ahmed Barelvi lost their lives. Now that was the end of the military movement that was personally launched by Syed Ahmed Barelvi. Now what was the influence of the jihad movement, of the movement of Syed Ahmed Barelvi? He basically was the first personality. Jihad movement was the first movement in India that was launched in order to expel the non-Muslim rule from India. Secondly, according to some historian, it turned out to be the forerunner of the Pakistan movement. For example, Syed Ahmed Barelvi tried to basically establish a separate state for the Indian Muslims. So in that sense, he was basically trying to protect the rights of the Indian Muslims in the form of in the form of a new state that he was trying to create. Thirdly, he basically tried to unite the Indian Muslims. There were many people who joined his army. They were inspired by his beliefs, and they started waging jihad. Then he basically tried to he established an Islamic state, although on a small scale in India. And in that state, he tried to apply the Sharia laws. And then he basically tried to through jihad movement, Syed Ahmed Barelvi tried to fill the gap that the Mughals were leaving by establishing an Islamic state through armed struggle. Now we can one by one briefly revise. I can repeat now the major points. So we can start with beliefs. Number one, he believed that in order to expel the non-Muslim rule from India, we had to launch an armed struggle. So he was basically holding a belief that Indian Muslims could get rid of the non-Muslim rule through armed struggle. That was the major part of his belief. Secondly, he wanted to re-establish an Islamic state where he could apply Islamic laws. Thirdly, he believed that the customs of the Muslim had adopted, the customs of the Indian Muslims were influenced by the non-Muslim traditions. So he believed that and wanted that the customs of the Indian Muslims should be reformed, and they should be made according to Islamic laws, and they should purify their custom from the non-Muslim practices. He believed that in order to purify the Muslim custom from the non-Muslim practices, we needed to establish an Islamic state so that Muslims could apply their own laws, Islamic laws. Now, what were the contributions? Number one, he waged jihad and armed struggle against the Sikh kingdom. He made wars against the Sikhs, and number two, he tried to unite the Indian Muslims so that united they could launch an armed struggle. Thirdly, he basically established an Islamic state and tried to apply Islamic laws. And fourthly, he basically he tried to reform the customs of the Indian Muslim and try to purify them from the non-Muslim traditions. Fifthly, he basically he tried to fill the gap, the political vacuum that the Mughals were leaving behind. And you know that East India Company, the influence of the East India Company was growing. As the Mughals were leaving the gap, the British were trying to fill the gap, and they were quite successful by the early 19th century. He basically, Syed Ahmed Barelvi, tried to fill the gap by establishing an Islamic state through the armed struggle. Now, influence one by one. Number one, he was the first personality in India who waged jihad movement. And secondly, his movement basically turned out to be, according to some historian, the forerunner of the Pakistan movement. And thirdly, he basically tried to establish an Islamic state, and he tried to apply Islamic laws, Sharia laws. Then he tried to reform the customs of the Indian Muslims and try to purify them from non-Muslim practices. Fourthly, he basically he tried to fill the gap that he tried to restore the political power of the Indian Muslim through armed struggle. And fifthly, it is stated by some historians that after the failure of Jihad movement and after the failure of the War of Independence, the Indian Revolt of 1857, the Indian Muslims stopped military struggle and they focused on non-military means in order to safeguard their interest in India.